Welcome home to USA Global TV and Radio, a place where dreams take flight, with authentic storytelling, diverse perspectives and meaningful conversations, where global stories unite and bridges are built beyond all borders. Discover world-class education, entertainment, hope and inspiration. Together, we're building bridges worldwide. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV. Download our app, USA Global TV. Be our guest or join our team. Visit usaglobaltv.com. Thanks to our founder and executive producer, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Music score by Yeffy Tang from Cloud Road Music. Voiceover artist Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. USA Global TV and Radio. Your home for global connection. All rights reserved. This video and its contents are the exclusive property of USA Global TV and Radio. Unauthorized use, duplication or redistribution in any form is strictly prohibited.
Howdy. Can authors really make money? I think for most of us, we know the answer is no. But if you treat it like a business and you actually start going out and doing business kinds of things, developing your skills in that area, maybe you can. Our guest today is Sebastien de Castell. Sebastien has taken those things that need to be done, his business acumen, his ability to take and market and make money as an author is exceptional. So, Sebastien, please join me up here on stage.
Hi, Red. Good to see you.
You are a fantasy author. You have couple major series, the Greatcoats and the Spell Slinger. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are probably the two biggest of my series.
One's adult, one's young adult, right?
Yeah, the Greatcoats is a swashbuckling fantasy, kind of Three Musketeers meets Game of Thrones series. And then Spell Slinger is a young adult magical fantasy series with, talking squirrel cat and lots of adventure and fun to be had. And then I have other series as well, the Malevolent Seven series, of course, which was a nice hit for me the last few years, and The Court of Shadows, and an upcoming sci-fi novel. You know what it's like in any business. You have to stay busy.
I was doing some research on you for the show, and one of the things that in the past we talked about your swords and other things, and I think it's always kind of neat. But one thing that caught my attention this time, it said archaeologist briefly.
Yep. Yeah, I was one of those kids in university who had 20 different majors. I didn't know at the time that I had ADHD, which only got diagnosed for me, a few years ago. So it's a weird thing to discover in your 50s. But I went through just every major sort of imaginable, never quite fitting in until eventually you reach a point where you have to sit down and go, of all the different credits I have, what can become a sufficient major in order to actually obtain the degree. And it turned out that it was archaeology with a minor in history. So unfortunately for me, the very first dig I went on, which was in a lovely place called Sutton Hoo in England, it was after all the really cool stuff had been discovered, of course. But the very first dig I went on, about 4 hours into it, I discovered that I absolutely hated archaeology. Like I loved it, it's so like so many enterprises that people get into, right? We love it in theory, but in practice, you might actually not be aligned with it at all, in the same way as you might love the idea of being an author. You might love even writing books, but the business side of it, the practical day-to-day side of it might be something that actually you don't enjoy at all. And that requires you to make very specific decisions about what your goals are going to be as an artist, as a writer, and things like that.
How long ago did you start writing your first book?
I wrote my first novel in 1997, which is quite a while ago now. I was making my living in a cover band, playing Brown Eyed Girl like 3 nights a week. And I was being sued by the bass player for control of the band, which is a weird thing to have in a cover band when you're making like $250 a week each, basically. So we were poor, we were downtrodden, and we were in litigation, or we were in threats of litigation, which was kind of hilarious. And so I did what I always do when life gets really confusing, which is I went to the public library, because you can walk into a library, as miserable as is imaginable as rootless as utterly confused about the world, lacking any sense of who you want to be and what you want to do. And you will find something in a library, right? And no one's ever going to tell you that's not for you. You shouldn't do this or that. And I came across a box of cassette tapes, which even in 1997, almost nobody had cassette players. And it was called Let's Write a Mystery by Ralph McInerney. And it was literally these 24 cassette tapes you'd stick into the tape player, and he would talk you through the process of writing a novel. And I had tried to be a writer before then, but I'd never kind of been able to stick with it. And there was something about Ralph McInerney, this quite famous mystery novelist, talking you through the process. Every tape you put in, you go, did you get your pages done today? If not, pause the tape, go get your pages done, then come back. That allowed me to write my first novel. And it was an absolutely terrible archaeological mystery called Skeletons in the Cloister, and which, thankfully for lovers of literature everywhere, will almost certainly never be published. But a few years later, I decided to give another try, and I wrote a novel very, very fast that had just sort of been percolating in me, and something kind of unlocked. And it became a book called Trader's Blade, which was my debut fantasy novel that got me a 4-book deal, which led to an 8-book deal, which led to another 4-book deal, which led to other subsequent deals. And so Our Lady of Blades, my most recent novel, is my 18th published novel in about the decade or so that I've been in the business.
Okay, so you got a 4-book deal. Is that when you first started understanding that I can make money out of this, but I have to have a different mindset?
Yeah, it's really fascinating to me how little information is readily sort of available and digestible for the people who become novelists. So, because we're starting with people like yourself, like myself, I think we center ourselves first as artists, driven by an artistic impulse to write something that is meaningful, to write something that we feel is connecting to a story that is important. But then you have to deal with things like agents and contracts and marketing and publicity and all these other elements. And I found it very difficult to find any concrete information. Starting with like the most basic question imaginable. Let's say one of your listeners has written a novel, they've revised it, they've made it the best version of the story they most want to tell, and they're lucky enough that a literary agent says, I believe in this work, I believe in what you're doing, and they take you on. And then that literary agent goes out and tries to get a book deal, and they call you up 3 months or 3 years later, and they say, congratulations, we've got an offer for your first book. And then they tell you what the advance is. How in the world is that listener of yours who's written this great book, how are they supposed to know if the advance is fair or not? I will tell you that it is completely normal to see an advance, someone send you an advance offer of, I don't know, $1,500 US. That's not rare. Now, I've never gotten that particularly lousy deal, but I did one time. Someone offered 2,000 British pounds for a short story collection they wanted me to write, and I thought that was nuts. But it's also not uncommon to have a situation where a debut author, you find out that they have a 2-book deal for $1 million, right? So how in the world are you supposed to do that? So that was the first big challenge, and I really couldn't find a lot of resources out there. And so right from there, as an individual business person, you have to start from some kind of principle. And my principle that I started from was, whatever deal I take, it has to be one where if I never see another dollar after what I get in the advance, no matter how successful the book is, no matter how rich anybody else gets, will I still be happy? And so I figured out what that number was for me. There's one of the reasons why it's so hard to get information about advances and things like that is that usually authors are generally either contractually forbidden or at least sort of socially forbidden within the world of publishing from discussing those things. But I will tell you that I had a sense, I felt like, what I want, if it's a 4-book deal, I want $25,000 Canadian. I'm Canadian. So which would be about, I don't know, 20,000 US a book. and I'll be happy. Whatever else happens, I refer to it as the barista level of success, or the coffee server level. If you were working full time as a coffee server, when I got my first book deal, you might make like $25,000 a year. And so that was the level. And I always knew that for my next deal, I would have to try to get what I call the dental hygienist level of success. And then after that, I was going to go for plumber, and then for chartered accountant. And as strange as it sounds, and I was so lucky because honestly, most people's first deals, certainly at the time, so this was in about 2012 that I was signing this deal. Most people, aren't getting those offers if they're new debut novelists. Especially me. I was doing swashbuckling fantasy during the grimdark craze, where everybody wants everything to be dark and cruel and full of torture, and I'm writing these sort of 3 swashbuckling magistrates, going around dueling and all of this stuff. So I was lucky, but that's a very difficult time and process, and really that's only the beginning of the business decisions that you have to make as an author.
But most people never get that book deal. They're just an author and they have a book and they publish it, whichever way it gets published, and that kind of dies a natural death. And most of them never sell 100 copies. So, their dreams of getting rich with their baby that they have so much time invested in, they do a second book, a third book, and the expectations are still there, but it still doesn't happen. And is that because they're not looking at, from as you said, an artist perspective, they know how to write the book, they know how to cover what they want. But from a business perspective, what I've seen is most of them wait till the book is actually published before they tell the world it's out there, myself included. My last book, I started 3 months before I ever put pen to paper and started marketing my book. Then I wrote the book, and then it's continually marketing throughout the process. But that's just one aspect of everything that's out there, is that marketing phase.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say you have to. So for me, I would say for your listeners that you first have to take a step back, because you shouldn't have business dreams. You should have a vision. And what I mean by that is, because dreams are sort of amorphous. I'd love to be a big famous author, right? But what you actually need to have, I think, is a vision, right? And that vision is something that is a lot clearer. For me, I had a very clear and specific vision. I wanted to earn my living writing novels now, and earn my living at a level that, for me, I think I set the number at 75,000 a year Canadian, or 55 or 60,000 US. That to me, I was like, if I could do that all the time, I would be happy. And part of the being happy is you have to kind of make a deal with yourself. Like, if I get there, I'm not going to sit around constantly going, oh, but this guy makes more than me. I wish I was this famous. Oh, well, now that I've achieved this, because that's the trap. You need a vision that you're willing to say, if I can achieve that, then I'm going to be happy. Because after you get that vision and it's clear as a business person, you can engage the part of yourself that's a business person. Go, now I need a system to get there. So you gave the example of, most writers, they don't get a book deal. I've signed book deals, now much larger than my first book deal. And then we can talk about all the other ways that your books make money, independent of just being sold as books in English. But I always stuck to that core principle, and a lot of people who don't get an agent, don't get a book deal. I have tons of friends who are very talented writers, who are self-published, who earn a great living. Some of them earn a much better living than I do. And I probably make around 120, 150 grand a year. It varies, but that's just from writing books, which is what makes me happy, that's my job. And those friends of mine, they figured out that, okay, they know where they want to be. So let's say they want to make a living as a full-time author, and they go, I can't depend on a book deal to get that for me, which means I need to sell this many copies of books at this royalty rate, whether it's on Amazon or whatever other system, in order to make that living. Now, what do I have to do as a business person to achieve that? What is the marketing work that I have to do. How do I get there? How do I measure how I'm doing? And so the funny, ironic part of it is that self-published writers are generally much more savvy business people than traditional authors like myself who have publishers and agents. But I wouldn't want anyone to think that being a traditionally published author means you're not running a business. I am running functionally a business. It's an IP business, an intellectual property business, right? I write a book. My job as an artist is to tell the best story I can, is to try to touch something meaningful and touch readers. My job as a business person is to figure out how do you now exploit that property the best way you possibly can in as many ways as you can to achieve the business vision that you have.
Okay, so you have the vision, you kind of know where there's some holes out there that you can fill because of your intellectual property expertise. You start your writing and you start your marketing and you start all those things to let, hey, we're all done doing something. And that kind of gets things going. So from a new author perspective, that's what they should be doing, even though they're not quite there yet. They're halfway through their, whether it's a novel or nonfiction book or romance, it doesn't matter. They're writing a book. But most people keep it a secret, and they shouldn't. It should be, hey world, here I am. And and with AI today to generate little videos and Facebook posts, I mean, there's so much technology there to help you in those areas. But again, most of us, that's not our skill set. But YouTube, just like you had Ralph McInerney in tapes, YouTube has so many people there that can help you do what you need to do. And not only that, if you train your AI well enough and long enough, they'll be able to look inside you and say, hey, this is really something that kind of fits in. And so there's a lot of things that can be done, but you have to say, okay, I'm an author, but to be successful, whatever success is, as you said, a minimum, I like the plumber part of it. I think that's pretty decent. I want to be like a full-time plumber, 100,000 a year, whatever it may happen to be, wherever your neighborhood is. Yeah. Now you have a vision and you have a number and you have a beginning of a pathway. And once you walk down that pathway, it may not be perfect for that particular book, but you market in a variety of areas. You do convention appearances, you do audiobooks, you do all sorts of things, because these are things that authors should be doing in addition to writing.
Well, and again, it's funny because, we can give people all the advice in the world. It's sort of like telling a 16-year-old, teenager, listen, don't think that you're, completely in love. Like, don't get lost in this romance that you're in, see the big picture. There's no 16-year-old on the planet, hopefully, and I certainly hope there aren't, who listen to that advice, right? They fall madly in love. They have this dream, this vision. They have these great heartaches. Writers are the same way. Your first book, if you sat a writer down and said, look, here's how you're going to analyze the market. You're going to figure out exactly what the market wants and what's profitable, where the gaps are, what story to tell, what to name the characters, what demographics to give the characters. You would almost certainly, on the one hand, feel confident that you were giving them the best chance for success, but you would also probably be ruining their career, because first and foremost, we start from an artistic impulse. And one of our jobs as writers, and one of the reasons why we have to keep those things somewhat separate, is you never want the business to stifle the artistry. And therefore you never want the artistry to lead the business side astray. You have to kind of separate them. So a lot of the marketing, as you say, if you're traditionally published, the vast majority of that marketing is done by publishers. And sometimes they do a good job, sometimes they don't do as good a job. And as you say, if you're doing it yourself, there's a million things you can do. The most important thing I always tell everybody is, if nothing else, start with a notion of how you're going to measure progress. So let's say you've self-published a book, you've sold 50 copies of it, and you're like, I need to do better with this book, right? So I'm going to do a bunch of quote marketing, right? The first thing to ask is, before you enact any campaign or initiative, is how am I going to measure whether the marketing's working, right? So, you say, well, I'm going to do a Facebook ad or something, and, and you go, okay, you put out the Facebook ad, you spend whatever, $500 in ads, and you generate, and you only see, 10 new sales. It's the same number of sales as you saw before. At that point, you have no sense of what's working or not working, do you? You're just going, well, I tried it and it failed. Well, maybe it failed because you didn't target the correct audience. Maybe it failed because your campaign materials were terrible, your message was wrong, maybe your link was broken. You have to be able to kind of go ask yourself, how will I know what's working and what's not working? So that's one of the challenges, and I have that challenge as a traditionally published author, because I don't often have the levers or the data that my publishers have when they're working on one of my books. And so I have to measure things using very odd metrics. So if I'm trying to measure how well a book is doing, if I don't want to wait until I get a royalty statement, I'll use things like the number of Goodreads ratings. So the number of Goodreads ratings on a book, goodreads.com, which is a reader site for those who don't know, it will generally be somewhere around 10 times. Every rating is probably 10 sales of a book. So if 100 people have rated your book, you've probably sold 1,000 books. If 10,000 people have rated your book, you've probably sold 100,000 copies of that book. But that's a very imprecise and sort of chancy way of trying to measure progress. But at the end of the day, the first step is, how are you going to measure whether what you're doing is working?
Sebastien, we're getting ready to go to a commercial break here in just a few seconds. So when you come back, I want to talk about the aspects of being the entrepreneur, the business, and with contracts and foreign rights and those kinds of things, films, so that just give people a little bit what has to go through your mind when you're really and truly running a business. So when we come back from the break, commercial break, we'll go down that pathway.
Sounds good.
What if many of the problems we associate with aging are not random? What if there are identifiable causes behind declining energy, chronic disease, and memory problems? We have been told that aging is simply something we must accept, that slowing down is normal, that growing older means growing weaker. But what if that's only part of the story? Why do some people remain active and engaged well into their later years? Why do others struggle with disease, fatigue, and declining health? What is happening beneath the surface? What processes drive aging? In Aging Sucks, researcher, educator, and author Red O'Loughlin explores what researchers have discovered about why we grow older. No medical degree required, no confusing jargon, just clear explanations of what researchers have discovered about the processes that influence aging. You cannot stop aging, but understanding its causes may help you make better decisions about your health, your future, and your quality of life. Because understanding comes before action. Action creates hope. Aging sucks. End the guesswork. There is hope.
Red O'Loughlin here. We're on The Wise Ones on the USA Global TV and Radio Network. My guest today is Sebastien de Castell. Sebastien, please join me up here.
Good to see you again.
I want to compliment you on the photo that you sent in for our notifications on our marketing. Really, truly a good photo. That's a sharp one. So I'm just going to congratulate you. I meant to mention that earlier, I didn't, but I really like that. The great smile, everything there. Just really and truly a really good publicity photo, though.
If only I was still that good looking.
All of us. Anyway, before the break, we said we're going to go down a little bit further into marketing. It's just not one thing putting something on social media, because you have sometimes when the success does come, whether it's a film or foreign rights or contracts or whatever, now we're starting to get into skill levels that even a good business person who stays in the United States and doesn't get involved in things now has to go look for help.
Sure. And the help is out there. Listen, I think the hardest thing on the planet to do well is to market a book, because we don't have a lot of analysis, really credible analysis, that tells us what really actually effectively markets a book. When somebody says, well, here's how you market a book successfully, mostly what they can point to is, here's some books that did some things, and those books were successful. So I'm going to say these tools are what made it successful. But in fact, you almost will universally find there were a million other books that did the same things and were not successful. We know that certain things are important, and I'm not a marketing expert on that front, but just briefly, the title of the book is one of your marketing tools. The cover of your book is your single most vital marketing tool. If you have a cover on a book and you don't test it in some way, put it in front of 5 people who read in the genre you're in and ask them what the book is about. Don't say, is this good or bad? Because most people can't answer. Ask them what they think this book is about. And first of all, if those 5 people come back and they don't think, let's say you're writing a fantasy novel and they see your cover and they don't think it's a fantasy novel, they don't even know from the cover that it's a fantasy novel, independent of seeing the title, then that cover's not working, right? If they think it's a fantasy subgenre that is not something you're writing in, they think it's romantasy, and you write very dark, grim military fantasy, then that's not going to work, right? So you have those things. You have to do the same thing with a title. If the title of your book is, you ask 5 people, what do you think this book's about? This is the title, right? So for example, my books, my debut novel was called Trader's Blade, right? So if you know nothing else, you probably go, well, it sounds like it's kind of swashbuckly. There's some kind of a trader in there. It's probably not set in the modern era for sure. So you already know some things. But if I named my novel, Falchio, like the name of it, then you wouldn't know that. You might go, oh, I like that name, so that might be good. But very often people come up with terrible names, and they come up with terrible covers. And that's tricky. Most writers, I happen to have a background in design, so I at least have some familiarity with the processes of evaluating a design. But I go through that process, right? I ask other people, what do you think this story is about? Just show them the image of the cover. So those are key tools. So is the back cover blurb. You have to be able to, in one sentence, tell somebody about the book in a way that would make them want to read it. And more than anything, the way that works is telling them something where they can imagine the story. It's not about using superlatives, in this awesome, perfectly wonderful, but like that doesn't really affect people that much. But if you go, it's got swords and magic and it's got a talking horse, there are literally tens of thousands of people who will buy that book on the strength of nothing alone. Once there was a time when I used to have, whenever I'd be called to have lunch with a publisher or anybody in the business, for some reason they'd ask me like, oh, what's your next big idea? And I didn't want to have the conversation, so I would just throw off something randomly. I'd say, oh, I have this idea. It's a romantic fantasy. It's Bridgerton with dragons. And just that. And I swear to God, every publisher I ever said that to said, I'll buy that book. Because for them, Bridgerton with dragons that will sell. And so all the stuff I've just talked about are things that don't cost you any money to do, right? Get the right title, getting the right cover, of course, costs money, but a lot less money than you're going to spend on advertising. And advertising a bad cover will do absolutely nothing for you. Advertising a bad title will do nothing for you. Advertising with the wrong text will do nothing for you. And those are things that are in our control. And those are almost the only things we know for sure will almost always be effective in one form or another.
I take new authors and I pull up Amazon and we go through the people who are in the genre that they're writing, the categories. And I show them the books, the covers, the fonts, the colors, all those kinds of things, and say, if you want a successful book, it's going to have to kind of look something like these. You can't put your picture on the cover and expect it to sell. So that's part of what I go through. I go through about 20 different books, and then we'll do the same thing with, So I try to at least bring that to them and use that as an example. This book sold 100,000 copies. Okay, there's something right about either name recognition or the genre or whatever. But some of the people are just first-time authors and they sell thousands of books, but the covers are really darn good looking.
Absolutely. Listen, one of the things I do periodically, especially when I have a new book, if it's a new series coming out, is I'll go over to a bookstore. So here in Canada, we have Chapters Indigo. It's our big box sort of bookstore. Down the States, you got Barnes & Noble. In the UK, they have Waterstones. and I'll go to the section where the books are that are the kind of book I'm writing. So I'm mostly a fantasy author. I go to the fantasy section and I just look, right? Because they're all there and they're beautiful, and you can, and I look and I see, and I ask myself, like, what are all the big debuts doing? Okay, maybe that's good, maybe it's not. And I look at what are all the perennial sellers, like, that haven't changed their covers in the last 5 years. What are they doing? I'll look at like the reissues. So Robert Jordan, the Wheel of Time series, very famous series, became a TV show recently. It's been reissued 5,000 times. What do those covers look right now? What are the latest version of the Harry Potter covers look like? Because you will find trends, and I promise you that the people who make those covers, they are dealing at a scale of profit and loss that is much, much higher than the rest of us. So they can't afford to screw it up. When Bloomsbury Editions puts out a new Harry Potter editions, literally they just put out new covers of these books, expecting the people who already read and own 5 different copies of every Harry Potter book to buy it again. They can't afford to make mistakes. So you can learn from them, right? And that's a huge opportunity. You know, if those core elements are right, you have the right cover, the right title, you have the right book jacket copy, you know, from there you can advertise. From there you can do publicity, right? If I come on a show like your corner bookshop show and I'm promoting a book, and, you know, unless I know how to describe the book in 25 words in a way that your listeners are going to be excited about, then to what degree am I helping the book by having the opportunity of being on USA Global TV, for example, right? You have to do that preparation. And if, you know, your first book, your first couple of books, you got to be an artist. You write what you want to write, the book you most want to write the best version of the story you most want to tell. And then, it's messy and you'll have to deal with figuring it all out later. But exactly what you were saying earlier, once you start, if you've written a couple of books and you're like, I haven't had the success that I want, then one of the things you have to do is, as you said, before you're actually going to sit down and write the book, go, look, what is it that I love in this genre? What do people who read in this genre heavily actually buying right now? Because I promise you, it doesn't matter how much you love Louis L'Amour Westerns. And Louis L'Amour was a great writer. And Westerns were a massive genre at one point. They're a much smaller genre now. Some would say it's a dead genre. Like, you go to a bookstore, try to find the Western section, right? That doesn't mean you can't sell Westerns. It means if you're going to sell Westerns, you need to figure out where those readers are, what it is they're buying right now. Because if you just try to sell them rehashed, like I say, Louis L'Amour books, they might not be interested in that. Or maybe that's exactly what they want now, and what they're sick of is, for want of a better term, hyper woke postmodern versions of Westerns, right? So that's just part of that sort of business process, independent of all those little technical steps of how do you make a good Facebook ad and things like that. Because all of those, as you rightly say, you can find really good instruction on YouTube. But a big part of this, is understanding what your business is as a novelist and where the money comes from. Because as you and I were talking about before the show, the money, the sales that are available for just having an ebook in English is one fraction of a much, much larger pie. And if you don't know where that pie is, what it is, you don't have the means to exploit it.
Okay, so you have your books, you sell them on your website. Amazon obviously is something that's always going to be there. But Barnes & Noble and Ingram Spark, and there's probably another half a dozen easy publishers. So would you recommend that they exploit all the publishers, or just a couple, 3 to get started? Or what would you recommend to let's say an author with the second and third book? They finally got that part down. Now they're concentrating on the business aspect.
Well, I think, your first and biggest decision from a business standpoint as an author is, do you want to be traditional or do you want to be self-published? And that's an important decision. And I meet a lot of people who desperately want to be traditionally published because they just want someone to take care of them and give them money and do all the marketing work. And I meet people who absolutely hate that idea. They want to be in control of their own business more fully. And so they want to be self-published. And I meet people who do both. And in fact, I think that is kind of the future. I've had 18 novels published. The only thing I've ever self-published are short stories on my website, and that's just something for readers who already like my books to come and buy and enjoy. And a short story collection. That short story collection, I didn't think anybody bought short story collections, which just shows you how messed up our understanding of the market is. But I've sold, I don't know how many copies, but I probably made about, I don't know, 20, 25,000 bucks off a short story collection that I wrote in 2 weeks. I would never have thought that was possible. But then one of the things I've learned is if you write a book that people enjoy, once you have a book that's successful, they actually really want to kind of renew that experience. And they don't always want to have to wait for the next big installment. And they're often really happy to just get to read short stories of other characters in that world. And that's what I did with the Greatcoats. I wrote a collection called Tales of the Greatcoats, Volume 1. And I am shocked how many people buy that. I'm shocked how many bookstores it's in, because it's print on demand. So I didn't sell it to a publisher. So it's understanding those divisions of, if you're going to go traditional, you have to get good at writing the query letter, at making contacts, at meeting writers who have agents, at tricking or blackmailing those writers into recommending you to their agent. Agents are regrettably immune to such pressure, but I've recommended a couple of dozen different authors and friends over the years to agents, and sometimes the agents have in fact taken them on, and sometimes they don't. But if you're, whatever you're going to do, you have to figure out a system that suits your vision. If your vision is, I just want to make a living at this, then, right from the beginning, my first book, and sorry to go on so long about this, but my very first book, Trader's Blade, I had a plan. And the plan was I was giving myself 6 months to get an agent, and then 6 months after that to get a deal. And I already had a cover. I already had everything lined up to self-publish it if that didn't work, because I didn't want to wallow in misery and go, no publisher took my, or no agent wanted my book. I'm just going to sit here and be sad. You have to have a way around that. And that was having a plan.
We're getting ready to wrap up the show. Sebastien, I know you have a book coming out here very shortly. You said by Christmas or something. But let's talk about that very briefly. But at the same time, tell people how they can get in touch with you, how they can buy your books.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So my books are easy to find anywhere. They're in Barnes & Noble and Amazon and all the usual places. And they're available in print, ebook, and audio. I think that's something really important for authors. Even my short story collection, I commissioned the audiobook because there's a lot of consumers who prefer to listen in audio. I have 18 novels published. For people who are wondering where to start, Trader's Blade is a swashbuckling adventure. It was my first book. That's an easy one. Or Spellslinger if you prefer sort of YA fantasy. My latest novel is Our Lady of Blades. It's a book I spent 7 years on, Red. So imagine that. And I'm saying this as a business person and a fairly effective. I've made a great living as a novelist, but as an artist, that book needed 7 years. I wrote and published 8 books while I was writing that one, but I still allow myself to be an artist when the book needs it. My next book coming out is Malevolent 9 that comes out in December. It's the end of the Malevolent 7 trilogy, which is a very irreverent, dark fantasy series, quite humorous. It's basically the Magnificent Seven, but with wizards going around blowing things up and swearing constantly, which is literally my pitch for the book, which is what got me a six-figure deal on it. And there's tons of big announcements coming out. And if somebody goes to my website, you've shown my website a few times, I recommend take a look at, one of the little menus is just an icon. It's a globe. And take a look at each page under there, because each one of those represents a different language. And because my books have been translated into 15 different languages. And so a significant portion of my income is literally from, publishers in other countries buying the translation rights and finding fans. There's nothing more fun than finding fans all over the world in places that you visit.
Sebastien, thank you again very, very much. I enjoyed our first talk way back when. I enjoyed today, and thank you for being our guest today. Great information. Fantastic. Appreciate it. So thank you, sir. Likewise. Thanks, Red. And we're wrapping up the show today. If you've seen the show today on YouTube and you're not a subscriber, please seriously consider being a subscriber to USA Global TV and Radio and the Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck platforms there on YouTube. Red O'Loughlin here. I have a show coming up in about 22 minutes called Talking Heads. And I'm talking today about carbohydrates. Are there any essential carbohydrates that we really have to have in order to maintain optimal health? Well, you'll find out. I am super happy with the way things are going today, even though we have a tropical storm just a few hours off the coast of Galveston, Houston, where I'm at. Not expecting anything. It looks like a nothing burger, but you never know. So take care of you all. We'll catch you next week and have fun. Enjoy. Bye now.
How much of your value have you been giving away? Saying yes when the answer should have been no? Lowering your price to secure the opportunity? Giving more while receiving less? Over time, it adds up. Until one moment brings clarity, you've been giving away your value. This is not about working harder. This is not about doing more. It's about boundaries. It's about pricing. It's about respect. From Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck comes a direct and necessary message. Stop over-delivering. Stop underpricing your expertise. Stop negotiating against yourself. Because when you recognize your value, everything changes. Stop giving away your value. Boundaries, pricing, and the business of respect. Available now wherever fine books are sold and on Amazon. A film by USA Global TV and Radio. Executive producer Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Videographer and cinematic production Paul Garcia. Voiceover by Ed Vargas. Stop giving it away. Start owning it.
Every great story begins with a vision. At USA Global TV and Radio for years, we've been providing world-class education, entertainment, inspiration, imagination, connections, and hope. Most people don't stay to watch the outro or the credits, but it's the people behind every success, behind every breakthrough, and behind every unforgettable story who matter. The TV show hosts, our guests, our sponsors, our publicists, our production team, our distribution team, our search engine optimization team, and so many more. You're the ones who make the difference. Every great story belongs to the people who bring it to life. Our future looks bright at USA Global TV and Radio, and that's because of you, our loyal fan base all around the world in more than 60 countries. Together, we're making a difference because you matter. USA Global TV and Radio, live streaming to over 60 countries. Voiceover, Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Video production and direction, Paul Garcia. Subscribe to our channel, USA Global TV and Radio on YouTube.
Thank you, viewers and listeners of USA Global TV and Radio, for joining us today. We're honoured to have your time and attention as part of our global community. At USA Global TV and Radio, we believe in the power of authentic conversations, meaningful connections, and creating a world of possibilities together. Want to be part of something bigger? Join our team of elevated listeners at usaglobaltv.com, a space where your voice matters and your ability to listen transforms relationships. Stay connected with us across all our platforms for thought-provoking discussions, expert insights, and empowering stories. Subscribe to our channels at youtube.com/c/USA Global TV. Follow us on social media and explore the endless opportunities we're creating for growth, learning, and inspiration. Together, we're not just broadcasting, we're building bridges and changing lives one conversation at a time. For inquiries, contact us at info@usaglobaltv.com. Produced by Executive Producer and Director Dr. Jacqueline Kerbeck. Voiceover by Mike Porter. Creative direction by Paul Garcia. All rights reserved. Visit usaglobaltv.com to view our full terms and conditions.